Welcome to Around the Table, another episode of conversations for and around Hero Round Table. We're actually in the same place today, in Yarram in Australia, and we have a visitor from America by way of London, who spoke at the last Michigan Hero Round Table, Kit Bennett. Welcome, Kit.
Hey, Matt.
Kit, could you give us a bit of background on what you do right now? You've got some of it on your shirt.
Yeah, so I'm a rowing coach in Arbor, Michigan, but I'm coming into close to my 20th year of coaching. Athletics, about 18 years in rowing. I'm a former teacher, it's like a middle school teacher, and have a great passion for developing team cultures and productive team environments, basically.
And rowing is not rowboats, but those impressive rowing machine kind of boats.
So racing carbon fiber 60-foot racing shell with 8 rowers and a coxswain in it. Coxswain steers the boat, or as small
and beats
as
a drum or something.
No. Contrary to popular belief, down to a one-person size boat, which might be 15 feet long.
And who are you coaching?
I'm the head coach at Skyline High School in Ann Arbor, and I'm the director of rowing at Washington Arbor Rowing Centre in the same town, which provides middle school opportunities, but the team culture piece especially, a lot of my time is spent with the high school team. So
this high school team is how old then? How long has the team been going? You started it?
Yes, yeah. Started it in 2009, so we're basically coming up to our 10th anniversary in September.
Yep. And so this is a culture. If we are going to talk a lot about culture.
Yeah.
It's a culture that you created from scratch.
Yeah.
So you went in deliberately. So I wanted to have this conversation today for people who might be about to start something, or who are in something and want to think about culture. But you had a real privilege of being able to start from scratch and say, this is where I want to go. Is that how it went? Did you start with, I know how I want this to work?
Yeah, I mean, I think since I'm 34 now, and I've been thinking about this, since I've been about 14 or 15 when I started doing sport very seriously. And I think it gave me a lot of time prior to hitting sort of 23, 24 years old when I started the program to think about how I wanted things to go. And there was a very clear vision and message articulated to the parents and the athletes on the team, because I think it's probably the same in many countries, but in the US, parents have a lot of influence on what's going on, and so you got to make sure that everything is articulated clearly, and you're trying to minimize disruption from those areas.
Right.
And I think I'm very grateful that I think the parent groups that I have are phenomenal. When I talk to my peers, sometimes that's not always the case, but I think it's because they're missing the communication piece of culture, and I think communication is 90% of what I do. I mean, body language, funny enough, being a big thing. Like, most people make their mind up on conversation 70% of the time before you even open your mouth.
Yeah.
Because they can see how you're leaning into it, leaning away from it, whatever it might be, and we've just been very passionate as a group conveying our message, and I think that has really helped sort of kickstart it. And I think when you're younger, and as a 23-year-old, you're instructing athletes whose parents are doctors, PhDs, heads of business, whatever it is, and so that's quite a daunting task.
So how have you? We'll talk about the culture that you've created, but what you've touched on there is that in creating a culture, often, and especially people that are watching this and that go to Hero Round Tables, are trying to create something that's different to the general culture, general environment, general society. So you're addressing, or you're having to deal with people whose idea of what the culture should be is one thing, which disagrees with what you're aiming to do. How do you handle that with parents? Because obviously, over 10 years, parents now are coming in eyes open, mostly, on this is what we're getting into. But how did you get people on board with that culture that were outside of the group of athletes?
I think for us specifically, there are 3 high school teams in Ann Arbor, and I was an assistant coach at Pioneer High School, and then there's Huron High School as well. So our parent board was made up of parents. The majority have had nothing to do with rowing, but had athletics experience. And then we had 1 or 2 families who happened to be from Huron High School's rowing team, just that their kids now, their younger kids are districted into our program. So that was a little bit harder, but it was basically impressing upon the group that this was what we're doing as a Skyline model. It's not we're not going to do what Pioneer are doing, we're not going to do what Huron's doing, and that's not a criticism on those programs. It's just we need to be clear that we are forging our own path, and we have to get excited about that, because I think if you just try and do what everyone else is doing, that's not exciting. It's not a clear message. It gets muddled, especially when you've got parents who've been intimately involved with another program.
Yeah.
That can get very confusing. So I just said, look, we've got to take this pretty hard line that we are building our own brand new thing. And it did. It developed a ton of excitement, and we had a lot of challenges. We had to go find a site to row because the site in town was getting saturated, and we went to a local university, and they for some reason said yes. I mean,
right.
Got very lucky, but that also brought into it, on the parent side of things, a lot of sweat equity. We had to build a dock, we had to build a building for the coaches to work out of, we had to build A-frames to put the boats on, and I think when you have those kind of projects, it really brings people together, and those classes of parents are still very close to this day, because they did so much of...
Bought in, yeah.
Yeah, so much physical labour and sweat equity was put in that they could not be anything but invested.
Right.
But I think to circle back to your original question, the first 6 to 9 months were pretty taxing. I mean, just because you're trying to persuade people that this is the right thing to do, and they maybe have some preconceived ideas, like you said. And it was just really not deviate. It was not taking the path of least resistance, because I think that would have been very easy to capitulate on certain things and say, yeah, well, okay, we'll do it this year and see how it goes. But then you're setting yourself up for failure down the road, because the boundary and expectation line has been placed, and then trying to make it harder. As with anything, it's with parenting. Same thing with parenting. Maybe start off out stricter and then dial it back. But if you start off easier and then try and bring it in harder later, it's almost always a disaster.
Yeah. So you're 24 years old, starting a program and wanting to create a culture, and you're telling professionals and kids and whoever, this is how it is. How did you get such a strong idea of what it is that you wanted? Why did you know that this is the way we're going to do it? What were the experiences that led to a 24-year-old having such a strong vision of that?
I mean, I've been involved in athletics since I was 6 or 7. And I did a lot of different sports. So rugby, swimming, water polo, cricket.
Cricket?
Surprisingly. And I eventually ended up with rowing, and just saw that it's a very pure sport in the sense that it is truly, there really aren't superstars in it. It's a very pure team sport, because you can only go as quick as the slowest person in the boat, and I was generally the slowest person in the boat. I was not an expert athlete, but I did work incredibly hard, and for someone who was not a naturally great athlete, to see that level of payoff, I think that's the easiest sell to families. Think, your kid will work hard, they will get value, that being the short summary of it. And it's how you're defining value to the family. So we have a big conversation on our team of it's always process over outcome. Now, don't get me wrong, outcome is super important as well. You can't just lose all the time either, but you are being very clear with the articulation of language to the families of what positive outcome goals could be. And so I think for me, I spent such a long time in athletics not quote-unquote doing well, because I was never a superstar, and it's the sport that really, there was a lot of synergy with that kind of process piece, because rowing is not an instant gratification sport. It's like swimming or cross-country or any endurance sport, basically. You don't just suddenly get good at them. You have to put a lot of grind in. Even if you're good at it, you have to put a ton of grind into it as well. So I think that really formed my kind of coaching sort of philosophy as a younger guy. And then
were there people that you remember from that period as well? Teenage years?
Yeah, definitely. I had a coach called Simon Waldridge, who's called Ziggy. and he was younger. He was like 22, I think, or 21 when he first came and coached us. And he went to he was an alum of the school, and he just was excited all the time about rowing, and like that's how, and it's kind of how I felt about it. And I think he got a lot of mileage out of us being excited.
Yeah.
Because he's 21. I mean, but just naturally through life, your capacity to coach at 21, my capacity to coach when I was 21 is very different to as a 34-year-old, and it will be very different as a 60-year-old. Mm-hmm. And he was just excited about it, and that was one of those kind of processes of osmosis of just absorbing that kind of excitement. And then I had it when I came to camp and worked with you and Karen and some other people, that the constant commentary during our staff meetings was, or especially the leadership weekends that we had before staff training, was that if you're not excited, the kids in front of you are definitely not going to be excited. Like that's a guarantee. Which it sounds obvious, right? You assume that's like, yes, okay, great, but it is very much lost on people.
Right. You assume it's an unspoken understanding, but it has to be spoken.
And it really, formulated a lot of those sort of things that are transferable into what I'm doing as a coach. And so I think having those examples in front of me were just pivotal in getting it done. And also just, I think I had a family that saw it as a viable, like, long-term option.
Yeah.
I think parents can be very quick to say, well, what's a coach going to do?
Yeah.
Especially a rowing coach. I mean, rowing coaches don't get rich. And so they were just very supportive of that. And like I said, I was teaching for a while. 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I see myself as a teacher more than a coach for the most part.
Yeah.
Because I think you're trying to develop a sort of deeper understanding of the process in front of you, but also we're using it as a medium to develop young men and women.
Yeah, so that's your focus really is on whole person, isn't it? It's
huge. It's
preparing them for life after you, because they're not going to be rowing to work or anything. The rowing skills aren't going to be particularly useful in the rest of their life, but it's the lessons coming from rowing, from your teachings, from the culture, from the teamwork. Yeah,
and I think I think people would like to jump on that sometimes as it being a bit cliche, but it's literally why I think I love what I do so much. I mean, you develop these fantastic relationships with your athletes who then, we're not even at the age yet where they're kind of going, well, they're just about to go off into the world and really crush it. I've got like a coaching couple, their coaching staff actually, it's the same with the coaches actually, and they're a little bit older, but they were actually a pioneer as my athletes, and they came and coached for me. And one of them's a naval architect, and he's just doing really cool stuff, and his wife's a PA, and they're doing these amazing things, and you're like, this is stuff I get excited about. And we went to their wedding, and that kind of stuff, and like you're just seeing how they're going to be as people in the community, husbands, wives, parents, whatever it is, but we're still probably 2 to 3 years away from seeing our own athletes doing that. Yeah. That's just like, because we haven't got a ton of graduating classes yet.
Yeah, and I think that is what it's often about, is that legacy. You're building legacy through your teachings now. That they can get absorbed and then retransmitted down the road through the examples you had when you were in that position of looking to coaches. What kind of effect it can have.
Yeah, and that, funny enough, we have 3 pillars of the program that we brought in probably 2 or 3 years ago, and it's now a constant hashtag with everything we do on social media, is hard work, compassion, and legacy. And I'd argue that, I think possibly legacy is the most important piece, because we're constantly expressing to the kids on the team, and bearing in mind, adolescent brain is centered around short-term satisfaction only.
Yeah.
They're just not wired for long-term goal setting, and we do a lot of fundraising for financial aid, and that's a legacy piece. That's huge. Like, the reason, because the kids and families say, why are we fundraising so aggressively? It's like, well, so other kids have the opportunity to have what you had, regardless of their financial ability. And like, that is a huge legacy piece. Like, because you don't know what those kids are going to go off and do,
right,
when they leave the program.
Right.
And we're big proponents of that. And like, then the hard compassion, somewhat self-explanatory, but we do want to hit home sincerely that you need to interact with each other in a respectful way and compassionate way. And then hard work obviously is transferable to everything. But yeah, so it's definitely you have to be belligerent with that communication piece. It is just constant
A repetition.
Yeah, and people, a coaching mentor friend of mine said, when they start teasing you about the stuff that you talk about, that's when they truly have engaged and understood it
and know it. Yeah.
Yeah. So like we talk about on the women's team at Skyline for years. And I can still remember when we made an actual specific shift towards this. But I articulate it to the girls that I want strong young female athletes who are role models. And they've started teasing me about this in the last year or two. Yeah. So it took about 4 or 5 years to get to that point. But they absolutely embody all those things, and they are absolutely role models in the school. And that's the most satisfying thing, because you're like, that has nothing to do with rowing. It could be anything. Remove athlete but strong woman, or whatever it is. If they could be in theatre, they could be in music. I think that's probably something I talk about with my peers a lot, is that it doesn't really matter what the medium is.
Yeah.
You can build a phenomenal culture in whatever environment you want to pick.
Right. Which is why I think that interview today is a good one for the viewers, is who knows what they're in.
Yeah.
But they're all in cultures of varying types, whether it's families as well, it's schools, it's workplaces, it's whatever.
And it comes up with everyone, talking to friends, and I have a friend who just moved to LA, and she's having a great time there, but she left a space that wasn't positive, and that was at least from the perspective I could hear, it was a massive culture issue. Yeah. So, on culture, your Bible of late has been the Culture Code by who? Who wrote the Culture Code? Oh god, I always
we'll put it in the show notes.
It's funny that I love it, and I always forget who wrote it.
Yeah, because you tell everyone to read it.
Yeah, and he wrote a book called The Talent Code as well.
Yep.
So
how long ago did you read that?
In September.
Oh, it's really recent.
Like really recent, and and for some of the people that know me on this video, reading is not. I'm bad with I used to be a voracious reader when I was from 10 to 20, and then for whatever reason just don't read a lot. So for me to really engage with it, I think it just takes me a while, and I kind of read it as I really enjoyed it, but I treated it as a kind of school exercise. I have extensive notes on it, because I want to be able to refer back to it. I think just before we start this conversation, I picked up my phone and I went through my notes app.
Yeah.
And I've got everything written down. But so September was when I read it, and
so how did that come to you? Did someone recommend it?
No, I think it popped up on Amazon or something because of buying the Talent Code.
Yeah. So you've spent nearly 10 years, or let's say 9 years, of building culture and being very confident in it and successful in it, and then you've read this book. What happened there?
Just thought light bulbs went off. And
was it confirming stuff as well?
Yes. There was a lot of affirmation. I think when you lead a process in anything, that whatever it is, there is part of you that thinks, am I just crazy? Because you're doing stuff, and we talked about this off camera, that it's that confidence. It's being confident in what you're doing, and reading the Culture Code gave me a lot of affirmation, because there are all these things that I was doing, and I couldn't have told you before September why I was doing them.
Yeah.
Beyond it being a gut feeling of, this is what I think works, this is what I've observed, this is what I've read about, I've researched about, but nothing as specific.
Mm-hmm.
And in the book, they sort of give a lot of scientific metrics as to why this stuff works, which is just absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
And some incredible stories. They talk about the trenches in World War One and communication between the Germans and the Allies, and how there was a series of undermining behaviours from both sides that led to the famous soccer games in 1916. I might have got that wrong, don't quote me on that. Can
you, for the people that don't know what you're talking about with the soccer game?
They won Christmas Day during World War One. Across the trenched lines, the front lines, the soldiers all got out and played soccer. And
against their superiors' commands, right? Did they say we're not?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes. Yeah. They were. They basically.
Obviously,
Yeah.
your officers are saying, no, don't go and fraternise with the enemy. But
and my great grandfather was involved in one of those soccer games. Like, it's a story that's been kind of,
it went all up and down the front.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And they took active steps after that process to remove all these undermining behaviours. And again, I have to get my notes out to tell you exactly what those are. But it was a series of things that happened from about October going into December. This was very small little tacit messages of safety, like, people being able to go into the no man's land to get things and not being attacked, which is a huge amount. I mean, the trust level involved there with not communicating somewhere directly is absolutely astounding. Yeah. And so there were just all these little things that were happening in the build-up, and then they say Christmas Day, right, we're going to... And there's an incredible commercial that came out with that whole... In the last 2 or 3 months, I'm blanking on what the commercial was for, but it has that whole kind of
There was
piece.
a film on it too, I think.
Yeah.
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 Can't remember what it was. It's probably called Christmas or
Yeah.
Christmas Day or something. So I mean, I think that's that unspoken culture is really big because it is by example, and it is taking risks.
Yes.
Not getting shot risks normally in culture building,
but you're dealing with the social risk. I mean, but for most of us, it would be social, right?
Yeah.
Like
you're right. Having that open sort of like, this isn't what we normally do, but I believe that this is an important thing, so I'm going to do it, and people will laugh at me, but I'm going to do it anyway.
And the Navy SEALs have a system. This is in the book as well, but they're called. I'm going to get this wrong as well. ARSs, which is basically after they have a mission, that they do it within 2 hours of having a mission, and they sit down and remove rank, specifically so people can talk constructively and candidly about what happened on the mission, because for them this is literally life and death. Yeah. And it has, I think they've been doing it for 20 plus years now, and it has transformed their whole development of their unit. And they are that model for everyone else. And it's you need to be able to set up environments. So, for example, for me with coaches, I have to set up an environment where they feel comfortable coming to me and giving me criticism, which is really hard, especially my coaching staff, for the average age is like 20. Mm-hmm. And for a 20-year-old to come to someone even that I'm technically relatively young, it's just difficult. And
I remember leading at being in a leadership position at the camp that we worked at. The general understanding was the boss was someone you didn't talk to or didn't admit things to do or didn't, and the culture that we created changed that. But every time someone new, or every time we had 100 new people coming in, you had to re-establish that. But it is, and that's why I started half an hour ago asking you about the outside forces, because that's the norm outside of work, outside of the camp, was that bosses were the opposition, the enemy,
as opposed to collaborators.
Yeah, and so you had to overcome those external cultures to make sure your culture was working. So there's that battle constantly. So with the book, it reaffirmed a lot of what you were doing, but is there new stuff that you've been doing? We're filming this in February. It was 5 months ago.
So we've implemented our own version of ARSs that we just talked about. Okay. And this is...
How does that look?
So we're piloting it right now. And we had a coach come in from South Africa who's very, very confident and adept not just for her age, she's just very effective. And we were sitting down with her and my sort of other number 2, Lindsay, and we just said, we've got to do this. We've got to work out a way to make sure that the younger staff can have a conversation with me and not hide stuff. And I think we haven't had a full session yet. We basically built into it where they've given feedback to Lindsay and Cinta, the other coach, and then we're going to have a separate conversation that's to try and get them comfortable with just producing feedback of any sort.
Okay.
And then...
Are you doing it after races? Events? After races, yeah.
The goal is to do after races, yeah. So our main racing season is spring, so we're going to try this properly in the spring.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, I would say informally, we've been doing this for years, because the truck, we drive a 40-foot trailer with a ton of boats on it, and we're pulling with a big truck, and so the core coaching group is always in there, and so we talk a lot, we debrief a ton, and actually Jacinta's predecessor Morgan created a great environment for like she felt that she could always challenge me on things. I think the best leaders have people who challenge them, and that was huge. And a lot of that would be like mum and dad in the front bickering, but it was always constructive, and it was always pushing towards a common goal. It wasn't just for the sake of it.
It reminds me of what I read about the pirates and the boats and how they were so successful. Is that I think they had a lot of them had two captains, one during missions or battles or attacks, and then they either had another one for outside of crisis, or they had a committee. And I think that sounds like what they're doing with the SEALs. What you're doing there, you've got this crisis where you have to follow directions from a leader, or people are going to die.
Right.
But then if the leader gets something wrong after the crisis is when it's appropriate to question that and call it out.
And that's a great point, because there have been times where I've had to say to the coaching staff, like, I think if people were a fly on the wall with our coaching staff, they would think that we're objectively far too relaxed with each other. There really isn't a hierarchy to be said, but outside of me doing some general direction, but there is a lot of that back and forth, which I think is really I enjoy it as well.
Outside of races, you mean, or all the time?
Just in general, there's there's a very fluid communication dynamic, and that I think is one of our biggest strengths. I think it can be a weakness if you don't channel it properly, and it's that discussion of when is it appropriate to push back. So, like, for example, and Lindsay and I had a disagreement at practice a few weeks ago, and the timing, that the pushback was the wrong timing. But we're both, I think, the other thing we're all very good at is saying sorry and acknowledging the mistake was made. And I think that's another thing that people don't do.
Yeah.
For all my bluster and abrasiveness as a personality, I will always step back and say sorry if I screwed up, because I think fallibility is the best way to develop trust. And we talked about this yesterday, vulnerability, right? And very sincerely so, because then people, they know that even if, like, for me, my MO is that I'll probably, if someone suggests something, I'll probably say no verbally and step back and think about it, and then say, that's a great idea. And I think part of it's a self-defense mechanism of just like, I don't want to agree to anything right now because it's too quick.
Like the logo design that we talked about today.
Yeah. But then I will, and my staff understands that's how I work.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's right either. I probably should say no less.
Yeah.
But there is now a complete tacit understanding of this is how Kit's process works.
Needs to think.
Yeah, I need time to think about it, and then we're good.
Yeah.
And so, and then sometimes the answer is still no. But there's always, I'm not going to just say no.
Yeah.
There's a reason.
Yeah.
So.
Anything else from the book that you've implemented since that was new to you? It wasn't just man, Kit, you've been amazing for the last 10 years. It was.
I mean, it's not. I think it's the conversation on productivity and cancers within teams. Team being anyone, any organisation. We implemented tryouts 2 years ago, not with the goal of culling large swaths of the team. Like, the goal of tryouts, or at least cuts in our team, is to remove children from the program who are disruptive.
Yeah.
Whether they're a good athlete or not an athlete, because there is the coach's discretion piece in there. It's not just about athletic ability. Yeah. We have plenty of kids, and I was that kid in high school, who aren't great, but are trying very genuinely and sincerely very hard at making improvement.
Yeah.
That is a valuable lesson, I think, for any age, and it'd be remiss of us to remove that opportunity. And there are always exceptions to that, but like I think in 3 years we've cut 3 or 4 kids out of a team of 85. It's a very small percentage. Yeah. But the first chapter of the book discusses an experiment that was they basically injected a bacteria into a group of people. They had like 10 groups of 10 people, and then the sociologists would put in someone who was a jerk, a Debbie Downer, or a complainer. I think those are 3 or whatever it is, and their presence in a group of 10 people would reduce productivity by 40%. That's one person.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine if you have 2 or 3 people like that in a larger group, that's catastrophic for productivity.
Yeah.
However you define productivity. And they said that the only time that was counted was when there was a white cell in the group that they weren't aware of because they weren't structuring that piece.
Yeah.
And it was people who were good at redirecting bad behavior, whatever the bad behavior might be. And so that's why, for us with tryouts, it normally happens after about a 2-year period. We don't just say, oh, you're difficult.
Yeah.
Because people can be redirected, and as coaches, especially with youth, that is our job.
It's your job, yeah.
We're trying to encourage positive development.
Right.
And so it's really a last resort for us.
Yep.
And it's well telegraphed. There's probably a 6-month conversation that happens with that. So I think I think out of all the light bulb stuff was fascinating just because that's a really hard thing to articulate to parents, kids, and everything else. And you don't want to necessarily describe it in those terms, but there is some at least backup of this is why we're doing it because it is so taxing on the rest of the team.
Right.
And generally for coaching, it's emotional resource. So if you have child A who for whatever reason is difficult or is not being able to be redirected after 2 years, you then have to weigh up, are all the emotional resources of the coaches spent on one person? Is that fair to the other 80 kids on the team?
Right.
So,
so I'm going to wrap up. What if someone's watching and they're responsible for a culture, or they have some power in changing a culture, or they're about to create a culture, they're starting a movement or an organisation, what do you think your 2 best pieces of advice would be?
Articulate a very clear vision of where you want the program or organisation to go. You have to have an end point. Now that will change.
Where to go in the sense of the goals of the group or of the culture? The goals of the culture.
Both. You need both, and then communication is everything. I mean, if you're not prepared to respond to people courteously, respectfully, and lay out clear expectations, then it's going to be a uphill struggle.
How have you done that with your staff, other than through example? How have you made that happen? Because that's not a norm either in the greater culture.
On a kind of practical day-to-day basis of responding efficiently to email, text message, that kind of thing is the kind of day-to-day stuff.
Yeah.
Like that's
by example.
That's by example.
Yeah.
And
have you overtly had to mold or direct people to get them into that habit?
Yeah, so that's, it's mentioned through, I would say at least on a weekly basis to the athletes and coaches. I make a big point of it at our team meetings at the beginning of the year that if we have such a logistics heavy sport, and I said I've been involved in tons of sports, and rowing is just very logistics heavy. There's a lot of things that go around it that you don't have to deal with other sports, primarily the transport of boats and other things. And you're racing for an entire day. So for example, you have a race and it's over a 12-hour period. We'd have a very clearly defined spreadsheet of everyone's to-do list and everything else. And that might seem obvious, but it's just not done. And I think when you start doing those small things, the bigger stuff comes in more easily. You're trying to remove, at least I will always over-communicate to remove ambiguity. And I've definitely been criticised that I send out too many emails and could you do this and could you do that? So for example, could you do a digest of the week? From my experiences, people don't read those. So no, I can't. Do I give probably, if it's something important, 90% of the information you need to know is in the subject line of the email. Right. You have to, because people will not read everything, despite you putting quite a bit of effort into doing it.
Right.
And it's teaching. It's a responsibility piece to the kids. So if someone asks me, well, when's this, and I will refer them back to the email that I sent, or the handbook that we have, or a piece of literature that we have made to make everyone our lives easier. And so that's a big one with the kids. If I get asked a question by the athletes, what's this? And I won't respond with the answer, because that's going down the path of least resistance. The easiest thing would be, and they're thinking, well, he could just tell me. I could just tell you. but then I'm not holding you accountable for doing what I've asked you to do in the first place.
Yeah.
And again, that's a non-rowing specific lesson.
Yeah.
Because their boss is going to expect them to do it when they're whatever job they do down the road.
Right. Great. So it's really setting up the vision of where the organisation's going, what it's for, and how it's doing it.
Yeah.
And then communication and regular communication, effective.
And maybe belligerent.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
So if people have got questions for you, want to engage with you, is it best to go through the Skyline website?
Yeah, if you go to skylinecrew.com, my email
skylinecrew.com.
is on the staff page, and they can, and I'll.
All right.
And if I don't respond in 24 hours, I did not get the email.
Hypocrite.
Yeah. So
you didn't get the email. And then and you had a really well received talk at the last Hero Roundtable in Michigan. The videos are out soon. So if you're watching and want more from or a more 12-minute version of Kit's thoughts on culture, that'll be there soon. But thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Matt.
Talk soon.
Cheers.